All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you guys have a wonderful lunch. And for those of you online, I hope your lunch is good as well. And yeah, let's settle down and we'll just prepare for the afternoon sessions. Well, I hope that your lunch doesn't put you into food coma and you get sleepy for the next session. Those of you online as well. Yeah, so in case of those of you are here, if you are sleepy, feel free to get yourself a cup of coffee or tea to just re-energize a bit. And for those of you online, feel free to get yourself a cup of coffee as well. So this afternoon, we will learn about digital rights, specifically data-centric digital rights, which delves deep into where digital rights needs to be applied into our data. The Meta Foundation has been cracking their heads for quite some time to surface and emphasize the importance of caring for our digital selves and to protect them in order to provide citizens, especially us who are frequent in the virtual world. The IO Foundation developed a framework as a reference to ensuring our rights in the digital space. This is called data-centric digital rights. So let us welcome again Mr. John to bring us on a journey for a deeper understanding of our rights in the digital space. Let's give a hand to Mr. John.
Thank you. All right. So what we're going to be doing in this session is to have an overlook as to the framework that we've been thinking, considering in order to be able to tackle with some of the difficulties, some of the problems that we have in technology, specifically on protecting people's data. It is not a definitive framework. It's still a work in progress. We just wanted to start throwing out some concepts, see if anyone gets interested enough to be able to get it implemented. So this, we call it a data-centric digital right framework. And it's rooted on the need on trying to provide technical solutions to the actual problems that we are suffering when it comes to data manipulation, data breaches, and so forth, that we keep translating or keep seeing only from the perspective of the people itself. But in order to be able to tackle them, we're going to have to dive deep into how the technology is implemented. Otherwise, none of that is ever going to be solved in reality. So I'm going to have to ask you to bear with me, because there's a lot of information that I want to convey in less than 60 minutes. As I was doing the presentation, I was realizing that I basically need 2 or 3 hours to be able to put everything properly. So I'm going to be condensing it as much as possible. And we're going to go into these 3 phases. We're going to be framing a little bit the problem. We're going to be doing a review of the DCDR framework, and then we're going to see how we can somehow move forward. Okay, so in order to set a little bit the stage, let's review very quickly some of the problems that we're having in technology nowadays. So some of the fallacies that we're facing. You have nothing to hide. I don't care if people spy my data because I have nothing to hide. My typical question when I'm in a crowd is, if you think that you have nothing to hide, please tell me the PIN number of your credit card and the last time you had sex. That normally makes them understand that some information is private for good reasons, and we want to keep it. And sometimes it's not even about your own privacy, it's defending somebody else's privacy who may not be in the capacity to defend themselves otherwise. And when we're talking about technology, technology can protect by design. So why are we not doing it as it is? There's another fallacy. It's the technology, the way it's provided to the common citizen, the common user, is the expectation that they have to know so much about technology. So you buy your phone, you need to know how to install things, you need to know how to protect things, you know how to make sure that certain permissions are not provided when some apps request you permissions that they shouldn't need, like this flashlight, why is he asking me for my GPS position access? The expectation is that you need to to know what is a virus, how to prevent, how to update your antivirus, how to install security patches, etc., etc., etc. All of those things are expected from people who are not necessarily digitally trained. That is ridiculous. You don't expect from a driver to know how to build a car. They just know how to drive the car. That's their responsibility. How it's built is not their business, and it shouldn't be. But right now what we have is all of this extra weight in the shoulders of these users, and what it generates is people don't care. It's too much complex, it's not my thing, I just want to use it, and I don't want to be bothered about what's going on behind the curtain. Then we have these kind of things like, don't load all the data that we have about you. Yeah, right. They will allow you through normally very complex processes, if they are attached to any sort of data protection law somewhere in the world, they might be reluctantly doing it, but what you never download is what they have learned about you. That's the trick. There's also this new fallacy coming up about data portability. Oh, you're going to be able to move your data from one point to another. Yeah, right. What they really want is to be able to train their own machines. They're not interested on securing your data. And it actually allows them to be able to do that in a legal perspective and without any sort of consequences or backlash by claiming that they are providing you with the ability to port, like you will be unhappy with a certain social media platform and you're going to be able to port all of your data to the other social media platform. Is that really what you want? Because I'm not sure if you're making their job easier than really what you should be doing, which is protecting yourself. We also have, I mean, I don't think that this is a very new concept for anybody, data breaches. There's a lot of information being breached all over the place. The consequences of them, we start seeing how they are, but I don't think we've seen the whole of it. I don't think people still feel it properly. I don't think people relate exactly about the importance of data being leaked in certain circumstances. Data protection laws, another problem. They're cool. It's nice to live in a world where data protection laws exist rather than not. The problem is, and this I've been discussing for years, they are very nice pieces of paper telling you what things should happen, but they're not telling you how to implement that things that they want to happen. And so you give any data protection law, including GDPR, for as much gold standard that it is considered, to a bunch of programmers. They will all be able to read it and to somehow understand it. They will all start asking the same question, now what? How do I implement this? And the next question is, okay, you have a software that claims to be compliant with a specific data protection law in a specific jurisdiction. How do you verify compliance in a standard manner? The Data Protection Commissioner in Malaysia, as well as the one in the European Commission, do not have the tools to be able to do this kind of verifications independently. Bigger problem, personal assistance. This is right now being absolutely overlooked. We are inviting in our homes the representatives of big companies that do not have your interest in mind. They have their economic, their financial interest in their minds. I'm not saying that they are not practical at a certain degree, fair enough, but the amount of data that they're collecting and the way that they can frame your vision of things, specifically on such circumstances, it's quite concerning. And you own the device, but it's not going to be lasting for so long. Companies are basically moving constantly into becoming service providers. And what that's going to turn is that they're going to be not selling you the product anymore. They're going to be leasing it to you. We see already that happening in other industries. And so the argument is going to be, well, if the device does not belong to you, the data it generates probably not neither. Another problem, and this one really touches my heart quite strongly, ethics. This is a word that goes all over the place in technology. That is really cool, as in we all have our own ethical system. That's fine. There's nothing against it. The problem is your ethical system is different from his, and from mine. So when you want to build technology that's going to be based on ethics, the question is whose? And how are you going to be harmonizing that across the globe where data is moving from one place to another? Is the ethical system of China the same as the ethical system in the US? No, they're not. So when you want to say, I'm going to be protecting your data according to my ethical system in China, or my ethical system in India, or my ethical system in Singapore, good luck trying to understand what's going to be the common denominator, the minimum common denominator. And so this is thrown around quite often, and it's worrying because it really feels like it's going to be a Trojan horse to be able to avoid certain things. Like for instance, let's say some country says, oh, ethically speaking, it's ethical for me, and in fact positive to know the GPS position of all my citizens. How are you going to be countering that? It's their cultural preference. So, summarizing all of that, we have pretty much many more than this, but these are the 4 core problems that we have identified in the past years. The first thing, the nature of data. A huge disconnect on understanding what data really is. The second one is the product lifecycle for software. Despite the fact that we have CI/CD pipelines and so forth, what we still don't have, as I was mentioning before, is a replica of the same product lifecycle from prototyping, verifying of compliance, production of mass production, sorry, and then getting into the market. You don't have that in software development because you cannot verify compliance. You can keep releasing versions, you can keep releasing services, but you will never be able to verify compliance because of the problems that we were mentioning before. There is no such thing as a standard verification of compliance. And so during the life cycle of an application, for instance, there will be no way for you to verify if a certain update makes your software not compliant anymore. You will have to repeat again a process that is per se not transparent and very hard to replicate at a scale and from a standard and automated perspective. What you really want is that every single company is playing at the same playing field. If I have a way to verify compliance for A, I should have exactly the same way to verify for B. That's what you do when you put different cars in the market. The manufacturer knows exactly what is it they're going to be tested for. They build a prototype specifically to be able to pass that test of they go into the market. The second part, or the third part rather, experts versus citizens. Right now, as I was mentioning before, there's too much expectation on the shoulders of the citizens. There is this very blur difference between an expert and a citizen. And it's not that I want to elevate experts into deities that cannot be accessible. That's not the point. My point is that when I get into this building, I don't care how it was built. My responsibility is not to set it on fire. That's it. But the fact that it doesn't collapse on me, experts know how to verify that it doesn't collapse on me. And that's the reassurance that I get. There is an agency that can get into the building and certify the building to be safe. And from that point on, it's open to the public can come in. When it comes to technology, we don't have that clear separation where you can have people who are in charge of making sure that the technology will be safe by design. And as a user, I don't have to concern myself with it. That's all. And one of the consequences of why that's not happening is because technologies are not motivated. And you cannot be motivated because you don't know what is expected from you. You keep hearing, oh, build me platforms that are respectful of freedom of speech. Okay, meaning what? How do I translate this into an algorithm? I don't know. There's 25 ways to do it. And again, you go into how you're going to be doing in a way that is standard, that you can verify compliance at all given times. How would you verify that all social media platforms allow for freedom of expression? Good luck with that. And for as long as you cannot provide that kind of taxonomy, that kind of language that translates those ideals into a technical language, you're never going to have technologies behind it because they don't know exactly what they're trying to help with. So I want to do a little of a strange metaphor, but it will tie it up on my as I progress in the presentation. So take a life. A day in your current life, it would be that you probably wake up in the morning, have your breakfast, you have a number of things on your agenda. One of them is to go run some errands, maybe renew your driving license, let's say. And then in order to do that, you're going to be using an e-hailing service because I don't know, your car is maybe on repair or you don't own a car. And along the day, you verify or you see that this application is not behaving in a way that you were expected, or is giving you problems, or maybe you tried 3 different e-hailing applications, only one was properly functioning. You decided to uninstall the other 2 because why do I want this on my phone? It's not giving me a service. That's quite the common thing to do, right? Okay, let's go back to this, obviously. What you are doing with all of those decision-making processes is that you're going to be combining a number of data points that you have around you and your own experience, if you will, putting it all together and run a process of decision-making process. So you will be deciding, I don't like this app based on whatever input I'm getting, and I'm going to decide to uninstall it. Okay, that is, pass me the expression, that's software. That's an algorithm that you have learned across the years. And you have obtained a number of data points from your environment, and you have decided to make a decision. In other words, pretty much what you spend your whole life doing is making decisions, which is basically turning you into a decision machine. Okay? How does that look like for, the life cycle of a person? You're born, you're living la vida loca, and then you're dead. You essentially have two main interesting points here, which are birth and death, point A and point B. And we tend to try to stretch point B as far as possible from point A, so that you can keep living la vida loca. You want to essentially do as much as you can in terms of comfort, but also security, to be able to die out of age longest that you can. I think we pretty much all want to do that. What's interesting is that we identify that what really shortens that life cycle, what really brings B closer to A, are physical harms. So here's your taxonomy. If you can identify the different activities, different actions, different events that across your lifetime can shorten it, then you know the kind of things you want to avoid. So for instance, you want to avoid having to have a conversation with gravity because you might kill yourself. You want to avoid not having access to food because you will starve yourself, and so forth and so forth and so forth. If you think about it, rights, the way we have been describing them specifically in UDHR, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, are the proactive attempt of avoiding a specific harm. That's a taxonomy that human rights and activists have. They can now have a motivation about what is it that they want to try to avoid because they have the vocabulary to be able to describe it, which technologies don't. So, where am I getting with all of this? The current framework that you have, extremely simplified, okay? The slide only gives me so much space and only have 1 hour to explain things, so forgive me the fact that I'm not getting into all the details. We regard data as a commodity for the most part. It's kind of this mystical dust that we can put together, or some specialists can put together, some wizards, and put together in a cauldron and get some magical result. But we don't see any relationship between us and the data. We see it as that external commodity. Data is everywhere, but not only is everywhere, it actually moves everywhere. And we have no idea where it goes most of the time. We like to delude ourselves that we know, but in reality, we don't. All that we're doing with all of that data that keeps going from one hand to another, from one company to another, is to model people, to model objects, and to generate predictions. Okay? And most of those domains where the data is being handled are in privately owned. I don't know that there's much big data being owned by governments, for instance, or civil society, or even yourself. The big chunk of it, I've never seen an actual comparison. I would like to see a statistic about it, but I would put my hand on fire that 70+% is owned by corporations, not by governments. And of course, we're talking about democratic governments with no agendas, etc., etc. All governments have agendas anyway. Okay, so every single digital system is always going to be composed of two things: data and algorithms, which is essentially the same thing that we do in our brains. We have the data that we extract from our environment, from experience, and the algorithms that is essentially the learned experiences that we have and the skills that we have adopted. These two keep pretty much reinforcing each other. So you obtain data based on running some algorithms from a previous data, and you can improve some algorithms based on the data you have obtained. Okay? Now, what that turns in the modeling that I was mentioning here before is that we are amassing huge amounts of data about people, putting them, running through algorithms, and turning into prediction machines. There is not much difference between us humans and machines themselves. The only difference at this point, and to my awareness, I would love if someone sees this broadcast and can give me an update about what's going on in the industry right now that I may not be aware of. But right now, what we are doing is analyzing very passively vast amounts of data to be able to make predictions, but not behavior. The behaviors try to be reflected into the people. What I mean to say by that is that I would like to know how long it's going to take for someone to spin a process to be able to take information that models someone, and that process behave exactly like that someone. That's going to be very interesting. That's going to be a next level of type of Turing test, trying to figure out if a software not only behaves in a way that you will say, but they can leave behind them the breadcrumbs, the fingerprinting that will identify you exactly as yourself. So what really happens is this combination of data extracted from you in so many places, in so many different platforms, it conforms what's called digital twins. Normally they are somehow incomplete, and somehow they don't necessarily have structures that we can comprehend because of how the data is going to be stored in the system. But essentially, you would consider them a twin of yourself. And why? Because that data is exactly you. You cannot have any data that is going to have any value if it's not sufficiently contextualized to be able to extract any value out of it. So if I tell you number 5, for instance, number 5 means nothing to anybody. But if I say number 5 is the number of credit cards that he has in his wallet, but it's different that it is in his wallet, because I need to be able to know who has those 5 credit cards. So sufficient contextualization of data is what's required. And once you sufficiently contextualize any piece of data, you cannot unlink that anymore. Otherwise, the value is lost again. That's why you try to do the pseudo-anonymization or full anonymization, good luck with that, as much as you can, so that no one can trace back a specific data set into the origin. Why? Because it can be used against them. Why? Because it is them. It provides information in order to be able to identify them. So one of the cool things, or cool because I like to think about these things, about data as we know it right now. So the first thing is data is not conscious. So data doesn't know that it's being copied. Number 5 doesn't know that it's being moved from one system to another. There's no way for number 5 to say, hey, someone asked about me. The system has to be programmed to be able to give you that response. So data doesn't know not only when is it used and how is it used and how many times. So number 5 wouldn't be able to tell you how many times it has been copied. So you cannot really expect that your data is going to be your defense for you. That's not going to be happening. And so, and relying on all the trails, I never believed in it, because you can always modify them. You cannot have them. It's so easy to basically to overcome them. So we had a prototype as to how do we create a taxonomy in order to be able to protect humans. We had the A, B situation, stretching B as far as possible through a life cycle. So what we thought is, okay, how about we think about in the same terms for data? Since data is myself, even if the life cycle is going to look differently, because it is not born and doesn't die in the same process as carbon humanoids as we are, carbon-based, but you still have a creation point. It's living, quote unquote, is doing something, and it ends. And I still don't have an answer as to what's the end, because I don't think deletion is necessarily the end or the only possible end. Okay, in the way we've been thinking about it, all the possible harms could be just as detrimental in terms of you not being able to access your data anymore. So that could be even considered the end as well. So what we thought is, okay, so we have a point A, now we have a point B. No matter how that life cycle works, if we can now identify what brings B closer to A, we can actually come up with a taxonomy of specific things to avoid. And once you have a taxonomy of potential digital harms, then you can define the digital rights, because you know exactly what it is that you're trying to avoid. So we've been trying to figure out how to put together all of this, because it's half theoretical, half complex. It's a lot of things at the same time. And we designed the data-centric digital rights framework based on a number of things, and this pretty much would be the current thinking that we have. What will be the components of it? The first one, a set of premises. You need to know exactly what are going to be your premises, because otherwise you don't know which direction you're taking. We designed the whole thing based on 3 structural layers, 4 taxonomies. We're still doubtful it's going to be 3 or 4. That's still a conversation going on. 3 principles, 1 oath. Yep. 1 set of stakeholders, 1 set of policy guidelines, and 1 set of pedagogical materials. And there will be a reason for each of one of them now. So The core premises that we've been thinking about for DCDR framework is, the first one is to identify the fact that I am my data and my data is myself. That's the core principle. That there's no such distinction between any data that represents me. It is me. The second one is that the extending the life cycle of that data is what matters. And it should be extended at all cost. And again, because I don't know, we don't have right now an answer as to how that life cycle looks like, I'm not 100% sure what does it mean to extend it. Okay, but we try to make a parallel comparison between our lives, our physical lives, and our digital twins. We take as a premise that harms shorten that life cycle, and that the rights are the proactive attempt of avoiding those harms. Quite a logical sequence. All right. Here's going to start getting a little bit more interesting. So we figured that there was all of these things happening between, there's an entity on the physical space, there's an entity A and an entity B, a person and a person, or a company and a person, or two companies, doesn't really matter, whatever the entity represents. And they have, in turn, their own digital twins representation. That could be, for instance, Google with their cloud services, it could be whatever, and an entity B having, for instance, data that defines them, a digital twin. What we started looking was, what was the interconnection and the actions between all of those four actors? And what we came up with was with a very simple approach that we feel is missing in the digital rights conversation, which is, where is the harm sourced and who receives it? In which camp they are? And so it was basically a very simple 4 options combination, where the source of the harm can be originated on the physical area or in the digital area, and it could be received in the physical space or the digital space. Examples. We looked into how to define human rights as any harm initiated either at the physical level or at the digital level that ends up creating the harm at the physical level. If I hit you, or if I stab you, from entity A physical to entity B physical. If I generate some information that might be harm you, like doxing you, for instance, and it's done by a third party, it will affect me because it ends up reflecting on me, physically speaking. We still have been thinking about introducing intermediaries, but intermediaries basically would be a loop, because you can have one or n intermediaries. It wouldn't change the way you're going to look at the processing of the information. And conversely, we've been thinking that when it comes to digital rights, what we want to understand digital rights, either it is sourced from a physical space or from digital space, the receiver is your digital twin. So any harm, any modification that your digital twin may receive, that would be considered a digital right. So we looked, can I have a reading on time? I'm good. I still would like to know the time. 30 more minutes. Okay, yeah, I'm good. So we decided to structure this in 3 layers because we wanted to be able to provide that taxonomy in a way that will be defendable from a scientific perspective, as in that we could actually demonstrate that taxonomy makes sense. We have structured it so far in 3 layers, and we have an alpha version of each one of them. Like I said, I don't have enough time to actually get into each one of them in detail, but I can definitely discuss with you more in privately later. So layer 3 is essentially macro vision on how the technology should be working. And I'll be discussing a little bit more later on that. Layer 2 is the definition of all the objects that are required for layer 3 to be able to exist. And layer 1 is the physical justification for those objects to exist. So for instance, in layer 2, you would do definition of objects, properties, and so forth, and what are the dimensions that that are referring to a specific object. And in layer 1, we do things such as defining what's a physical space, how physical space creates a digital space, and how, for instance, a digital space cannot generate things that don't exist in the physical space to begin with. It's a bit theoretical, but essentially, you cannot create technology that physical space does not provide you features of. And that, I might get a little bit deep in here, but it's a reasoning coming from the history as to, from the physical space, what led us into technology, what led us into digital spaces. Starting with mental spaces, so we our own representation of things. So for instance, discussing with you and I'm modeling Kwon in front of me, and I can imagine that he has problems with his vision because he's wearing glasses. He's not telling me any of that information, but I'm modeling all of my surroundings so I can make a decision as to where I'm going to be moving next time, or what are going to be my dinner tonight, or my decisions in any other aspects of my life. That's my software. So I'm generating a mental space that provided me with that information based on the data that I have and the algorithms that are running on my head. We started passing them in other mediums, because the problem that those spaces have is that they reside only in your head, and being able to express them is always problematic. So we started finding other places such as paper, and we started writing books, and we created those physical spaces. And eventually we figured it out that technology allowed us to overcome some of the shortcomings that all of those spaces had. And so we've been working on being able to define what are those characteristics and why do they define objects in layer 2, and how that informs that life cycle that we're discussing and what the harms that they can be exposed to. So the taxonomies that we've been discussing, like I said, it's 3 or 4. That number is still not clear. The 4th one is not here. The first one is digital harms. So we need to have a taxonomy on digital harms. What are the harms data can go through their life cycle? Based on that, you can start defining digital rights. And another one that is very surprising, that, again, I want to be proven wrong, but every time I'm asking this question, no one can provide me a good answer. There seems to be no standard taxonomy of use cases. That still blows my mind. So there isn't an actual document defining all the possible use cases for data. Let's say in healthcare, you're going to be exchanging data for, you're requesting the access data from a doctor from one of your health records, or a feedback loop where you're going to be sending information to a party, and you're expecting the party to answer to you, and how you're going to be having all of the exchanges. All of that prototyping doesn't seem to happen. There seems to be no standard of document. And the question is, how are you going to be able to advocate for instance, for data minimization if you cannot prototype the type of exchanges that 2 applications can have? That's going to be impossible. And if you want to lean towards data minimization between not only different applications, but different jurisdictions, you need to be able to prototype what are the operations that are going to be done through that data, so that you provide only the one that is required. And to my surprise, that's still not solved. I really want to be proven wrong. This really bugs me. So, summarizing the whole thing, you have a physical person and the data that represents them. They can go through personal harms to their life. The data can go through digital harms to their existence. You would want to protect them through human rights, and you would want to protect the data through digital rights. There will be a number of conventions and a number of organizations that would be taking care of that. And the idea is that you have an enactment, you have an implementation. And who are the implementers? You may guess, well, technologists. And the reason why you want to have all of these type of approach, it's because I'm going to use an example that I like to use. 2 doctors can get together and decide about how to solve or how to propose options for a cancer situation. So there's a patient has cancer. They need to come up with 2 or 3 options for an oncological treatment to propose to that patient. These 2 doctors can have the conversation about how to design 3 options because they have the taxonomies to define what is the cancer that is being had, what are the chemicals they can use to try to cut it down, what are the side effects they're going to be able to face, what are the medicaments, the drugs they can use to try to curtail those side effects, what will be the delivery mechanisms, what's going to be the nurses and the human resources necessary to do that. Why? Because they have the taxonomy to express exactly what is it that they're trying to achieve in their language. And the reason why they can swear a Hippocratic oath is because they know what is it that they're trying to achieve. We want to save lives. It's very simple. They can verbalize it. You ask a technologist, so what do you do or what do you want to do to make technology safer? Okay. Because they don't have a way to define those particular actions. So summarizing a little bit of what I was mentioning before, the DCDR framework will be researching now on the data life cycle. We're going to be looking into all of those taxonomies that I was mentioning before. That's going to be the work that we'll be doing in the coming months. And all of that is hopefully going to be consolidated in something that we call a Universal Declaration of Digital Rights. Points for originality. The idea of a UDDR is to have a proposal that would come in 3 parts. That's the way we have designed it so far. The first one would be the document L, legal document. You can't avoid this. You need to be able to define in words that humans can understand what is it that you're trying to defend. The document T is a technical document, which is actually a translation from that document L into actionables from technologists. And the part 3 is a digital rights SDK. The idea that you should be implementing all of these libraries, all the protections that we are discussing, all the rights directly into a library that is easily incorporated into your own stack. The reason why you want to do that is because when you are in your CI/CD pipeline, you want to be able to upgrade it at a certain degree. First thing, one advantage for any company to be able to have such approach is that compliance is automatic. You will be given an SDK by the government or by any agency that is provided the authority to do so. And being compliant, which basically means incorporate that SDK in your stack and make use of it and the calls that it has. That's it. Verification of compliance will be because that SDK will have a number of public APIs that can be probed from the outside to verify if certain things have been done or not. And what you would want is specifically at the segment of test to be able to have that agency to check your compliance inside your pipeline. So you would have an external audit API that would allow you to verify before you deploy. So you don't even need to send the software anywhere else. It's just automated. One interesting thing to consider is that every single product that you use, every single product here in this room has these 2 sides. One, compliance, and second, value proposition. There's not a single product that escapes to that law. You can get this chair, and you need to make sure that the chair doesn't break when you sit. That's compliance. That's the minimum thing. But the color, the design, that's value proposition. Every single chair is competing only at the level of value proposition. They don't compete at compliance. No car is competing at compliance. They always compete at value proposition. I've got more ABS, I've got more speed, I consume less, yada, yada, yada. But the bare minimums, all of them. So what you would want is companies to compete at the value proposition part, but not the compliance part, making it easy for them, lowering the cost, and specifically de-risking their exposure in terms of compliance, because it's not their business anymore. So one cool thing that we've been thinking about it is that all of that stuff that I was mentioning before about the personal assistants is that we should have personal assistants, but they should be personal. I think they should be under your control. And the way we see things, that they should be the ones who actually control your digital twins. All the data that you have should be basically managed by by your personal assistant. So how do we see that transition between the model that we have right now in terms of software to a possible implementation of DCDR? Okay, so first of all, having a piece of software that can do all of those complex operations for you is what you want. What happened to the guy that I was telling the story this morning who went to run an errand to do the change of the update of the renewal of the driving license? He went to that particular agency because he couldn't send someone in his behalf. If you could duplicate yourself, you would do it. And if you have a PA, you can send the PA. What is the PA? There is a presentation of yourself. What is a security camera? A security camera is a proxy because I don't have enough people to put a policeman in every single corner of the street. They are proxies of you. Your digital twins are proxies of you. They represent you, they model you, they can act on your behalf. So the idea is that how I'm going to be handling all the data that is distributed across big platforms. We'll have a software that does it for you. And that will handle that data in the way that you want. The reason why I prefer this approach rather than other approaches that are coming, such as data trusts, is because data trust, I don't know if you ever heard about what data trust is. Show of hands, ever heard about it? So data trust is basically someone puts a company and you will handle them the ability to manage your data on your behalf. It's basically a middleman. And you are just basically pushing the game of the trust, because if you don't trust a big company, why would you trust a data trust? No matter it's even in the name, but that doesn't tell me anything. So you would want to be able to control your own data all given times. And most of the services that you have right now are easily understood as an ability or a service for your PA. If I need to book an e-hailing service, the PA can do for me. So the service that nowadays you have in an app from, let's say, Uber or Grab or what was the other one? Doesn't matter. Huh? Lyft. Exactly. Thank you. You are going to their platforms for that service, but nothing stops them from being able to generate the code so that you can incorporate the UDT. They become the middleman. They still get a cut for providing you that service, but they're basically making your DT learning more, your PA. It's an ability that is generated that is provided to your personal assistant. And in other cases, you're going to have digital twins going to other platforms, traveling, if you will. And that's basically digital real estate. When they're going to be hosted for a specific function or particular outcome in a platform somewhere in the world. You have to think that one of the reasons why we want to be looking into this way is because there isn't such thing as governance of data. Not really. And the more they're trying to erase the borders between data communication between different jurisdictions, the only one who's ever going to be taking care of data properly is going to be yourself. So, one of the big conclusions. We really, really regard technologists as the next generation of rights defenders. They are the people who are building and designing and architecting all the stuff everyone is so much concerned about. If we don't talk to them, if we don't involve them, if we don't make them, if we don't provide them with the tools for them to know exactly what is it that they're trying to defend, there's not going to be a way for them to get behind it. And so academia requires at some point, and of course I'm talking DCDR because that's the topic of the talk. But in reality, what you need is academia to be able to provide that knowledge and those tools so that they become part of the solution and only part of the problem. I don't remember if this was in a movie or a conversation that I had with someone, but that was very telling to me. So I was asking, how do you make technology better? He said, I don't care. I just care that I'm not doing something wrong. And the question was, okay, define wrong. Reason? No taxonomy. You can't measure. You don't know what you're doing. So, hopefully, to get it done, what we've been looking into it is kind of a transition time, because we know that before we get an MVP, before we get all the theoretical research, it's going to take some time. But then you need to build an MVP in order to be able to have something that resembles to the SDK, so you can show how the flow is going to be happening. But we already thought about trying to change a little bit mentality as much as we could. So we came up with these 3 DCDR principles. Everyone, when they throw principles, they do very long documents. We thought to keep it as short and sweet as possible and as easy to remember. Principle number 1, I am my data. And a very easy, simple way to understand it is treat other people's data the way that you would like to be treated. Principle number 2 is end remedy. What do we mean by that is most of the regulations that we have right now are remedial, even GDPR. Well, if you request Facebook to delete your data, and if they don't do it, and you discover that they don't do it, that's a lot of ifs, then you have the possibility to go and sue them. Well, I don't want to have to sue them. I want the technology to have done what I requested it to be done. That's it. So trying to have a very proactive mindset to try to have all those problems solved before they happen. And the third one is essentially rights by design, which is a kind of a super group of the idea of privacy by design. The idea is that if you have a number of regulations in your jurisdiction that protect you, well, they should be implemented directly in the technology by design. So when you get a phone, if you are supposedly covered by PDPA in Malaysia, well, every single app that can only be installed in the phone should be PDPA compliant, technically speaking, and you shouldn't have to concern yourself as to whether it is or not. The only reason why it can be in your phone, it's because it's compliant. We came up with the first version of a potential oath. This is all in order to generate a certain sense of purpose. We know that it is not the technical solution that we were hoping for, because that's going to take some time. What we thought is to try to have kind of a migration or transition time by which we could already instill some thought into programmers. And we basically took the Hippocratic Oath from doctors, and we tweaked it to sound technologists and to reflect the DCDR principles. And we also made a declaration for how big tech uses our data, and specifically social media. And those are ready. So those 3 principles are ready, and these 2 documents as well. This would be a very quick timeline of our work. So we have the principles and second oath, which very likely are going to have to be updated along the line. That's to be expected. The DCDR framework, and then the implementation of the GDR. That's going to be what we're going to be investing the next months. Well, next steps. There's been in the past some working groups that we had, specifically trying to define digital harms. We conducted our working groups in our take-up space on the AirMeet. There's going to be a lot of research, and we've been trying to identify specialists in a number of areas so that they can actually pinpoint and put holes into part of the theory or the ideas that we have, which of course they are not perfect. And then we hope to eventually release an MVP. This is likely going to be one of the biggest challenges, to try to change the mentality of what the nature of data is. For you to understand how much of a problem this is, there is currently 11 definitions of what is data. So trying to put together a consensus worldwide as to what is data is already complicated. But then if you put the layer of technology using the data, if we cannot agree on what data is, imagine what is that we're doing with technology. We have no idea. There's going to be possibly along the line some difficult decisions or some conflicting thoughts or things that people don't want to think about. One of them is that we may want at some point, and I'm not necessarily advocating for this. This is just a thought that we'll be having because of a number of parallelisms that we found with certain industries and technology. But maybe we will have to start having degrees of access to certain features and to certain services according to the degree of preparation of the user. Think about it. Everyone can go on a bicycle. Not everyone can get into a car. And the reason why we have licenses for driving is because we understand that the car can kill people. good luck. I mean, you can keep people with a bicycle, but it's way more difficult. Okay, the likelihood of having a potential harm by using that vehicle is way higher than the bicycle. And instinctively, we understand why. And that's the problem that we have with data, because we have this emotional disconnect with it. The instinct is not kicking in. So when data is used and misused, it doesn't really feel like nothing to us until the day. So we already have a certain degree of knowledge about this, for instance, with social media. We wouldn't allow, certain social media wouldn't allow minors, children younger than 14 years old, for instance, to be participating. Because we recognize that they need to have a certain degree, their algorithms have to be trained enough to be able to understand the consequences, to make better predictions as to a specific action, what are going to be the ramifications. So maybe we're going to have to be thinking about something along those lines. But the only way to actually be able to reach this conclusion is once we have a taxonomy, and we can have a degree of what is the risk of each of one of them and how much they harm you. Right now, it's theoretical discussion. We may want to look into data embassies. This is something as well that shocks us a lot. So you have, for instance, PDPA that says it only covers the Malaysian territory. Okay, so what happens when the data leaves Malaysia? Oh, not my problem anymore. That's weird, because as a Malaysian, if I travel to Colombia, I still have some protections that are granted to me by my Malaysian government. And they are granted thanks to bilateral agreements between Colombia and Malaysia. And if any of you gets kidnapped in Colombia, well, the Malaysian government has tools to be able to undo the situation. So when data travels from Malaysia to Colombia, why are we not having the same type of protections? It's not so crazy, but apparently no one wants to think about it. This is cool. The moment that you start thinking about you are your data and your data is yourself, maybe some of the regulations can be just thrown through the window, because constitutional rights will already be protecting them. And it's not so much of a stretch. We've been trying to find lawyers who can actually help us trying to figure out if this argument is sustainable or not. But this for us seems to be a very nice step in order to enact quite immediate protections. So there's always going to be an invitation. If you guys like what we've been discussing and what we've been working on, by all means, get in touch with us. Because the question is, in what kind of digital world you want to exist? It's not about you just interacting. There's going to be there an existence. And think about it. What's going to be the situation when a judge will be presented with proof that someone attempted to hack an online banking, and that judge cannot make the difference between the digital twin and the physical person? That's around the corner. Not happening tomorrow, not the month after, but it's going to happen. And we don't have ways to answer this, because we keep seeing data as something external. Logitech was caught 2 or 3 summers ago capturing fingerprinting you by using your keyboard and your mouses. Everyone has a different way of using the keyboard and a different way to use the mouse. You can track that attempting to do an online heist. But if I have that information, then I can reproduce the way you behave and leave exactly the same breadcrumbs as you would do, how I'm going to be able to say, no, I'm sorry, it wasn't me? It says here that it was. That's going to be difficult. I always end up my presentations with this slide. It never gets old. We are not the people anymore. We are the cyborgs. And if you think that I'm overreaching, I invite you to give me your laptops and your phones, and in 1 week time, we have again this conversation. Those devices have become an absolute part of you. It's not because they're not fusion with you. I'm not thinking about the cyborg as in the movies, you know, with the bionic arm and so forth. You have a device that you interact with, that thanks to it, you can pursue your life as modern requirements, if you will. And the only thing is at a very, very low latency type of interface using your thumb and your eyes. But it is a part of you. And if we cannot start controlling how those devices are given to us, how they are built, and how they are presenting your data, You're done. And I go back to my warning from before. A lot of companies are turning into not selling devices anymore, become service providers, so that they can lease you your laptop, they can lease you your phone, they can lease you your personal assistant, they can lease you your car. And then you can say, oh, but I'm generating data should be mine. No, it says here on the small print that any data generated with this device belongs to us. What's going to happen when people actually have bionic replacements? There's already very good eye replacements. Oh, it's going to cost you 1 million for a new one. I can't afford it. Well, I can give you a 1,000 ringgit plan per month, provided that you tick here the option that everything that you see is our property. Who's going to say no? Yeah. Which one? Deus Ex, yes. Okay. I haven't played those games, but I know about them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's fine. No worry. Carry on from where you were. Get it closer to you. Maybe is it off? Just press the button for a few seconds. There you go.
Like from Deus Ex or Cyberpunk, we can see that these systems will be jammed. Like Deus Ex, the company hijacked the heroes' bionic equipment and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So in the future, I agree what you say that these companies would somehow get our data and maybe control our lives. And I do agree that our mobile devices, laptops are one thing we can't live without. We are a cyborg indirectly.
Mm-hmm. Well, think about it that way. You pointed out to a topic that I didn't want to get into because it sounds so such a conspiracy theory that it's always difficult to talk about it. Neuralink. I like Elon Musk in general. I mean, I don't have any specific adoration for the guy, but I do like the fact that pretty much everything he's trying, at least it gets spoken about. And there are not so many people who can actually put a Tesla and send it to Mars. That's quite a feat. That's quite an accomplishment. But he's going to be releasing in not too long, basically a chip that you can plug into your brain. And it probably has very good applications. My concern is there is nothing to stop misuse at a design level because we don't have this taxonomy. It goes back to the same thing. If we don't have the core conversation, which is what is it that we're trying to avoid, and we have the taxonomy to be able to define it, you're not going to be able to design technology that avoids it. So do you really want to go into the conspiracy? Let's just raise the question. What stops Elon to put that chip in your head and control you remotely? Because I was listening to his latest interview with Joe Rogan was in summer 2021, if I'm not wrong. And that's when he started revealing a little bit more about what Neuralink would be able to do. And then basically their expectation was to be able to allow paraplegic people to walk again. And being able to change your perception of colors, being able to change your perception of reality. So where are the limits? And what stops him from being able to say, flip of a switch, 50 people under my control? I'm not saying that's what he wants. I'm saying that the technology he's playing with opens for that possibility. And no matter how well-intentioned he may be, someone along his supply chain may not. And the only way to avoid all of those things is you have checks and balances, and you know exactly what it is that you're testing. So that certain things cannot happen. I'm going to give you another example, biometrics. I use a fingerprint to log myself with my computer. And you say, oh, aren't you bored that maybe someone has your fingerprint? Of course I am, because I can't really trust those devices. But what I would like is technology that allows me to be able to verify my fingerprint, and that verification only happens between the sensor and the computer, and that's it. And that from an architecture perspective, that data cannot travel anywhere. That's it. Because I do want the convenience, but I don't want the data to be copied. But right now, we don't have any of that. You have, right now, for instance, in Europe has been, I don't know what's the status because I didn't follow on that anymore, but there was an attempt to be able to do a provisionary ban on facial recognition systems all across Europe. I never understood why they wanted to do that, because they're still tackling from a remedial perspective. They want to make rules so that if someone misuses your biometrics, you can go in and sue them. Well, how about we design technology that doesn't do certain things that you don't want to do? And so that you can actually release those devices in the market, and you don't have to worry about those particular use cases, because by design they cannot happen. The reason why you want to be able to train developers like this is so that they go. This is something that kind of reproach to civil society, because they've been looking at things from a very traditional perspective. You have to bring in as many technologies as possible, give them this training, give them at least this mindset, and hope for them to participate in open standard working groups, so that that information and that thinking starts being there. The standards that come from those groups need to already implement those protections by design. So certain things cannot be done by design. The cool thing is that governments tend to take legislations for whatever is permissible in a jurisdiction. If you have that problem solved there, it trickles down to a lot of governments at the same time. You don't have to be fighting with each one of them one by one. There's power on being able to do changes in technology at the core, because technology is everywhere, and technologies are everywhere. You have a lot of headway, but the only way you're going to be able to convince they know what the hell they're trying to defend. Until then, nothing. And the model, by the way, that I was mentioning about the PAs and so forth, is what you propose on your policy proposal. The way to be able to send your a proxy of your DT to another place, and to be able to interact with the real estate, digital real estate. Okay, I hope it was interesting enough. If there's any question, what's the time? I'm good, just on time? All right. So if there's any other question, you can always find me privately later. And thank you for listening. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mr. John, for the very insightful and in-depth presentation and sharing. I think definitely there are a lot of things that we have to consider, and understanding the data is useful and also dangerous for us. I think that with that, we'll take a good 15 minutes break from here. So we'll be setting up the APRIGF session on Towards an Eco-Internet, a multi-stakeholder dialogue on policy making. Thank you.